Hi, this is Adam Feinberg from Harlem Stories. Unfortunately, my host or co-host today is unable to make it, Mark Becker. Hopefully he'll be in on future episodes, but for today, you've got just me. Today, we're going to talk about the house that the circus built, the James Bailey Mansion. When I mention the circus, everyone thinks of P.T. Barnum or Ringling Brothers. And, a lot of times the name gets forgotten is that it's, or at least the last iteration was Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. And nobody really knows, or most people don't really know who, the Bailey is when I talk about the Barnum and Bailey Circus. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about James Bailey, the residence that he built in the what's now Sugar Hill Historic District of Hamilton Heights, and kind of the craziness that has surrounded the more recent sale, and how can we see more of it, of this house. Now, as I always say in every one of my episodes, when we talk about, specific properties or neighborhoods, it's great to listen to me and it's great to have the background on it, but go out there, get out there and see it for yourselves. Walk the neighborhood. So in 150th, right off of St. Nicholas Avenue, there's St. Nicholas Terrace. There's actually multiple St. Nicholas named roads in Upper Manhattan, but this one is, right off of that intersection on 150th. And it's kind of hard to miss the mansion that is in front of you at 150th and St. Nicholas. And so it is a little split, kind of almost fork in the road type of thing with St. Nicholas Avenue, St. Nicholas Terrace. But they're so close together that, I'm just going to call it St. Nicholas at the moment, for the reference over here, because I think there's only really like 20, 30 feet separating out the two avenues. In any case, today we're going to talk about the house that James Bailey built and a little bit about the background here and why I find this house so fascinating. And there's so much to it, a rich history, including its last sale sold for 86% off the original asking price. That's right, 86% off of the original asking price, and we'll get a little bit more into that. And now it's time in the silver screen and the small screen, but certainly you can see the house more in TV now going forward. So when the circus came to town, it's always been a big deal, and I remember as a child the Barnum and Bailey Circus coming into Manhattan, walking the elephants through the tunnel. For some reason, I think it was the Lincoln Tunnel, if I remember correctly, but I seem to have read, somewhere else that it was the Queens Midtown Tunnel. But so I could be mistaken there, but I do remember the elephants coming through the tunnel, going through Midtown over here. And, the legend of P.T. Barnum is so widely known and reported on. And I know that there was even a recent movie about his early days and starting a circus. Can't remember the actor's name, but he's the guy that plays Wolverine in the recent Marvel movies, the Australian guy. A case, I know he did a movie called The Greatest Showman, and it was about P.T. Barnum. So little gets talked about his partner James Bailey, but at the same time over there, his partner James Bailey, he never got the same level of notoriety. Both of them had run their own circus and eventually wound up joining forces to become the Barnum and Bailey Circus, the greatest show on earth. And today we're going to focus on James A. Bailey and the home that he built in Hamilton Heights. And despite the many changes in the neighborhood, the home remains. It's a rare survivor of the long-lost period when single-family unattached mansions were built. I think this is going to be a fun episode as we dive into old New York history, a famous circus man, members of the Tiffany family, a magnificent mansion that has survived for more than 100 years, the transformation it underwent as a residence and funeral home, being overtaken by a pack of inbred dogs. And then we get into the financial crash of 2008, 2009, and how that impacted the home. We'll get into a little bit into the current restoration and even watching the house and television episodes. So a little bit about the early history on this. James Bailey was born, actually James McGinnis, in Detroit in 1847. He was orphaned as a child and landed a job with a traveling circus managed by Frederick Bailey, and he later adopted Frederick Bailey's last name. By the 1870s, he co-owned a circus, which included a tour of Australia before combining it with a London circus. And his ambition frequently brought him into direct competition with P.T. Barnum, until ultimately the two rivals wound up joining forces in the early 1880s and formed the greatest show on earth. So, in terms of, all of our episodes, and I mentioned this earlier, it's like, get out there, see it, sorry, I mentioned earlier it's St. Nicholas Terrace. It's actually St. Nicholas Place. There are many different St. Nicholas Avenue, within and streets, within Upper Manhattan. But sorry, no, it was actually, I want to be corrected over here. It's located at St. Nicholas Place on 150th. And St. Nicholas Place is just off of St. Nicholas Avenue, sort of. And if you want to think about it, it's like a fork in the road, or maybe even like a service road off of a highway. It's this short avenue. In 1886, James Bailey and his wife broke ground on the mansion. The house took about 2 years to complete, which is faster than many Manhattan homes today that can be completed. During that period, the area was being marketed similar to how we view Billionaires Row today. So, interestingly enough, it was being marketed as a very high-end area. In the early turn of the century, we saw a shift again in development with the subway and the rise in popularity of apartment houses. Many of the Gilded Age houses were demolished as developers tore down these single-family mansions along St. Nicholas Place in favor of apartment houses. So there are still a few that remain, but but ultimately, many of them got torn down. So this house was built in limestone. It's got 25 rooms. It's over 8,000 square feet. And ultimately, as James Bailey aged, his health started to fail, and he started making plans to retire in this mansion. He ultimately wound up filling the 25 rooms with curios from his world travels. And then he ultimately commissioned a terracotta ornamented stable down on 150th near Convent Avenue. Now, I'm kind of wondering if this is the same stable that had turned into a parking garage and most recently turned into apartments. So I'm wondering if that is very much the same location that James Bailey commissioned. And, maybe we can get the developer of that apartment building into the studio here, and we can ask them, was that garage / stable, was that the James Bailey house? Maybe they'll know. If anybody knows in the audience, feel free to reach out to me. My email address, Feinberg, Fein as in Nancy, Berg, at elegran.com. That's ELEGRAN.com. So if you happen to know the answer to that, feel free, reach out to me and chime in. In any case, we saw this over here, some of the standout features of the house. We're not architects, and we don't expect you to, and I'm sure there's probably an architect or two that might be actually listening to this the podcast, but in any case, we're not expecting the average listener to know all these different styles of architecture or the fine details. in a house as grand as this. But there are some stunning aspects of the house worth mentioning without needing to know a lot. But for reference, the architect is Samuel B. Reed, and he built a mirror image of this house in upstate New York, Cortland, and was featured on the cover of Scientific American in 1890. Funny, I thought Scientific American was a science magazine. Maybe it had changed over the time. Again, listeners, if you know the answer to that, feel free to chime in. But yeah, ultimately, the writer, he admired the house's harmony of design and its wealth of mosaic-like stained glass windows, created through an innovative process patented by Henry F. Belcher, who created an innovative process for creating beautiful mosaics in stained glass. There's a lot of speculation as to why the company closed, but considering the toxic asbestos and lead that workers were breathing in to create these works of art, I'm going to guess, and I'm going to add my hat to the ring in guessing that they had a difficult time retaining employees. The house had approximately 100 windows, and about 70 of them are a vivid stained glass. A curator of the Met was blown away when she learned how many of the Belcher windows were intact in one location, and that this was the original location for the windows. These windows made the entire house a work of art, and this was pretty recent that the curator of the Met actually went and saw the house and all the stained glass windows. So it's not like this is from 20, 30, 40 years ago. This is sometime in the last couple of years. So the house has a variety of architectural elements: Romanesque revival tower, a curvilinear Flemish gables with a high chimney with Tudor roses. So I don't expect you to know all this, but at the same time, you can imagine that the house is fairly ornate to combine all these different styles of architecture. One immediate noticeable feature of the house, it's a freestanding single-family house with land separating it from the next lot over. While this was common in 1886, but for a freestanding mansion to survive in Manhattan today, well, that's exceedingly rare. You can probably count on your fingers, how many mansions still exist like that in Manhattan that are not like museums or that still are residences, and that have not been carved up. But in terms of the features of the house, there's a heraldic carving of a medieval knight's helmet over the front door. The interior includes medieval-style design elements like carved maces in the stairway balusters. And if you're not sure what that is, it basically when you think of the railing for the staircase, it's at the very bottom or sometimes the top. And that's what that feature really is. So giving you a sense, the grand front staircase contained an ingle nook beneath it, ornamented with yet another mosaic stained glass designed by Henry F. Belcher. Personally, I had no idea what an ingle nook was before working on this story, but I've since learned that this is like a recess that adjoins a fireplace. In essence, it's like a partially enclosed alcove designed around a fireplace. These were common design elements during the arts and crafts era, but began to disappear with the rise of central heating. I just can imagine seeing myself and my friends sitting in this area, catching up around old times, sitting around the fire in a warm, cozy, seated area. It just sounds so cozy and warm, and just imagine it's almost like the perfect wintertime activity of just hanging out with your friends, playing a board game or just chatting about old times and times coming up. Anyway, I'm digressing, getting into some of the fun I can imagine myself living in this house. But the house was actually landmarked in 1974, but by the early 2000s, the mansion was in distressed condition, and its elegant interior was at least partially destroyed by a pack of inbred dogs, and one of its 4 chimneys was dangerously tilting. Preservationists were worried that an unscrupulous investor would buy it and hire a lawyer and engineers to persuade the city that it needed to be demolished. Instead, the leak-plagued structure was saved in 2009 by a couple who fell in love with the home. They have been restoring it ever since, often by themselves or with the help of a family member. A lot handier than I am, but that's to say. They expected the full restoration of the house to take probably another 5 to 10 years. And even with cash infusions gained by renting out the house for television shows like Law and Order SVU and Boardwalk Empire, they're still working with operated limited funds, so it is going to take them a while to really fully restore it. But in the 1890s and during the first few years of the 1900s, apartment house developments were growing toward the neighborhood, and this led ultimately to James and his wife Ruth to move to a new home that they had built in Mount Vernon, New York, in Westchester, for those that you don't know it. And they ultimately wound up selling the house in 1904. James died 2 years later at the age of 58. I don't really have a whole lot of information from that period of 1904 to 1951 about the house. But, in essence, it's fair to say that, that there was a lot going on there. And, as a result, they needed to do they needed to invest tremendous amount of money into it, well into the millions. They were able to salvage joists from dumpster innovations all about town and, trying to save some money, here and there. They replaced more modern aluminum windows in the observatory with historically appropriate wooden windows, and something that was achieved by researching the window design from the 1890 sister house. So great that they had a model to work off of. They learned how to do a lot of the work themselves, building their own scaffolds, and with a cousin completing the restoration of the perimeter wall. The basement now has a wood shop where their cousin works with them to help replicate intricate profiles and mortise and tenon joinery of the mansion's original windows, many of which had been replaced with more modern but aluminum windows. The house is up for rental for TV and movie shoots, and anybody interested, if again I know of the company that is booking it for them, I can connect you with them if you need that. From an external point of view, the current owners have done an amazing job restoring this grand mansion. Now, one thing I definitely want to mention further on this is the house went up for sale in 2000, I think it was 2000, early 2008. And the original asking price was $10 million. Now, the house was in really poor condition to the point of when the current owners wound up, going and viewing for the final walkthrough of the house. They're down in the basement, and they were ultimately, the house was in such poor condition and so many issues over there. When the owners didn't recognize that while down there, they got infested with fleas. In fact, covering all of their legs with fleas. So, just to give you a sense of what kind of poor condition it was, some of the floorboards, had broken through, and, the dogs unfortunately had urinated throughout and really kind of, really did a number on the floors and the walls and things of that nature. And ultimately, the current owners have spent a fortune and a tremendous amount of time trying to restore it and eliminate the odors that were in the house. I've heard that some people that would walk through the house when it was up for sale were walked out, just almost as fast as they walked in, gagging. It was in such poor shape. Now, all that combined with the financial crisis that wound up occurring in later 2008 and into 2009 will help explain the extreme swing on the price. Now, I know that there had been one or two price cuts, from that original $10 million. But ultimately, the current owners wound up buying it, and they had to beg, borrow, and plead from, friends and family to do this as an all-cash transaction. But they wound up buying it ultimately for $1.4 million off of an original ask of $10 million. 86% discount. You never hear of anything like that in Manhattan. But here you are. Obviously, in order to restore the house, whoever was going to buy it was going to need to put millions into it. So I know that there was so much more into like the fine details of bringing this house up to speed. And I know there's been some articles out there on the internet, including a relatively, I think it was this summer, June. Yeah, there was a New York Times article in June of this year, 2024. New York Times chronicling, I guess, some of the experiences that the new owners had gone through in transforming this house to something that they can actually live in. But yeah, there's so much more to this story, but I do want to keep these episodes relatively tight. But I at least wanted to kind of give you an introduction into it. There's a good blog I know out there. I think it's Daytonian. In Manhattan, I believe they did a story on the house as well. So for anybody interested in some of the the finer details of the walkthrough of the house, between that New York Times article and that blog site, you'll be able to find out a little bit more about the house and some of the fine details. But my goal here today was to kind of give you a sense that this house even existed and some of the cool aspects behind it. But I can say is for Law and Order, the episode where it was featured in there, I know that Judd Hirsch was in the episode, and I guess it was probably somewhat of a homecoming for him because he graduated from City College, which is only roughly around 10 blocks away from the house. So a little bit of a homecoming for him, but certainly interesting little side note about the house. But hopefully this has intrigued you more to go and take a look at it. 150th and St. Nicholas Place, and ultimately it is right off the almost the cliffside, separating off between Central Harlem and Hamilton Heights, and you can really see the reason why the neighborhoods are named at Central Harlem being in the valley, and and Hamilton Heights being at the top of the hill, and it can be seen just a half a block away from where the James Bailey Mansion is. Well, thank you for listening, and hopefully we've given you some great takeaways. Knowing about this cool house, take a look at it for yourself. You can see it. I know it was Law and Order SVU with an episode of Judd Hirsch, and if you want to go search for that online, you can actually see the house in there. I think it was also going to be used for the Blacklist as well. I know I saw signs shutting down the block right before the COVID shutdowns. So I don't know if the house was for sure going to be used in the filming, but I kind of strongly suspected it. Just the nature of shutting down that block, made it a reasonable likelihood that they were originally planning on using the house. Well, thank you for joining us at Harlem Stories, and hope you continue to listen for some great content. We got a lot more great stories coming your way. Thanks. Have a great day.